The head of the European Commission names the full team that will negotiate with Britain over Brexit. Jean-Claude Juncker says the new task force will be composed of the Commission's best and brightest. Not everyone agrees.
What we really need is to have a sensible, common-sense approach, and for this Parliament to recognise that it's made a mistake and to find somebody who actually likes the United Kingdom to lead these talks. Thank you.
We'll be getting the latest live from Strasbourg. Also this lunchtime, MPs attacked David Cameron over his role in the collapse of Libya and the rise of Islamic State in North Africa. The gold rush continues. GB's Paralympians equal their tally of medals from London 2012, with 5 days still to go in Rio. Under threat, species including the turtle dove and corn bunting are in danger of extinction, with conservationists blaming intensive farming. Stars in their skies, the new map which will show more than 1 billion new stars in the galaxy.
Here's the south set to swelter again this September. Doctors warn there's been an increase in cases of skin cancer. And a charity that helps homeless people in Berkshire finally gets a new home.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. The EU Commission has officially created the task force that will carry out negotiations with Britain on its exit from the European Union. The announcement came on the day that the European Parliament's negotiator, Guy Verhofstadt, told MEPs that Brexit was an opportunity to make progress, not to take revenge on the UK. But Nigel Farage said it was time for the EU to find somebody that actually likes the United Kingdom to lead the talks. Our Europe correspondent, Damien Grammaticus, is in Strasbourg. Damien.
Yes, well, so today we've heard coming from Brussels, the news that they are now creating this Brexit task force of their own to deal with the Brexit negotiations. That will be up and running, they say, from the beginning of October. Meanwhile, here in Strasbourg, the Parliament has already appointed its own chief negotiator. As you were saying, Guy Verhofstadt, former Belgian Prime Minister, seen by many as an arch-federalist, a real supporter of the European project. But the event here today was the President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, delivering his State of the Union address. Much of it focused on the problems that Europe is facing, but it was the issue of Brexit that drew the sharpest exchanges.
Jean-Claude Juncker says a moment of existential crisis for the EU. The Union, the President of the European Commission says, is divided, bickering, facing the threat of galloping populism. And those watching outside are asking if its very future is in question.
They are wondering whether Brexit is the beginning of the breakdown and disintegration process for the European Union. Allow me to state here today that we respect and at the same time regret the UK's decision, but the European Union as such is not at risk.
Mr Juncker has just appointed his own Brexit task force, and he said it would be best if the UK begins talks as soon as possible, because the EU's position is clear.
That means only those can have unlimited access to the single market who accept there can be free access for persons and goods. There can be no à la carte access to the single market.
The European Parliament has already appointed its own lead negotiator for Brexit. He's the former Belgian Prime Minister Guy Verhofstadt. Today he said he'll not seek to punish the UK in negotiations.
Brexit is not a matter of punishment. It's not a matter of revenge. I never did politics like that. It's, in my opinion, a question of the sound relation between Britain and Europe. Let's stop on both sides of the channel or collective depression. And let's stop the politics of division and seize this opportunity not to kill Europe, as some of you want, but to reinvent Europe. Thank you.
Mr Verhofstadt, a true believer in the European project, has long been an arch foe of Eurosceptics, unafraid to duel with those he views as nationalists and populists. This is how Nigel Farage described him today.
A fanatic. In fact, there is only one real nationalist in the room, and it's you. Because you want flags, anthems, armies. You
Men
are
are used to trading barbs.
nationalist, and I frankly think that this appointment amounts to pretty much a declaration of war on any sensible negotiating process. If you stick to the dogma of saying that for tariff-free access, to reciprocal tariff-free access with the single market, we must maintain the free movement of people, then you will inevitably drive us towards no deal.
And Nigel Farage said no deal would be better for the UK than membership of the EU. All sides are laying out their negotiating positions. Reaching a deal on Brexit remains a distant prospect.
But here today, Guy Verhofstadt was asked, does he believe that the UK should trigger Article 50, begin the process immediately? He said yes, and that is what everyone now, I think, in Brussels and Strasbourg is waiting for. The dividing lines are becoming clear. What's not clear is how they will bridge the gaps. Back to you.
Damien, thank you very much. MPs have blamed David Cameron for the instability in Libya and the rise of so-called Islamic State in North Africa. The Foreign Affairs Select Committee says there was no coherent strategy and an opportunist policy of regime change which had left Libya in chaos. The Foreign Office says the intervention was backed by the UN and the threat posed to civilians by Colonel Gaddafi could not be ignored. Richard Lister reports.
British bombers in action over Libya. This began as a humanitarian mission, protecting Libyan civilians from President Gaddafi as he tried to suppress an uprising. But within weeks, Britain, the US and France said he must be removed from power. And that mission, says today's report, was ill-conceived from the start.
We were not prepared for the consequences of a regime change in Libya, and all the analysis being done here was based on, frankly, a pretty limited understanding of exactly what the situation in Libya was.
Libya today is a failed state, torn by rival militias, a place where so-called Islamic State now has a strong presence. It's become the main gateway for illegal migrants into Europe. Thousands die in the attempt, with little effort in Libya to stop them. So who's to blame? At the time, David Cameron did a victory tour of a newly liberated Benghazi, jubilant about what seemed to be a foreign policy success. But the committee says he never developed a coherent strategy for what would happen next. Mr. Cameron hasn't commented on the report and declined to give evidence to the committee, but his then Foreign Secretary blamed the chaos in Libya on decades of misrule.
The responsibility for the state of Libya today rests with Colonel Gaddafi, in power for 40 years, with hollowed out institutions, with no proper system of government, with a tyrannical dictatorship. That is what has caused the condition of Libya today.
The report says General Richards, the Chief of Defence Staff at the time, was concerned about the focus on regime change, but the politicians pressed ahead anyway.
The big question for all of us in the future, if this sort of thing came up again, is it better to allow a dictator who may be appropriate to the country and to the times in which we're living to remain in power to ensure stability, rather than risk the chaos of an unstable country such as Libya and, of course, even more starkly, Syria today.
5 years after the UK and its allies intervened in Libya, it spiralled into dangerous chaos, potentially more of a threat to European interests now than it was then. Richard Lister, BBC News.
Let's get more now with our diplomatic correspondent James Landale. You could be forgiven for drawing the conclusion that the lesson is don't get involved in the Middle East, full stop.
Don't get involved, or at least think twice before you do it. I think the message from this committee is to say, look, whenever you do any kind of operation like this, make sure the intelligence you've got is sound. Make sure that you know what your strategy is and don't keep changing it during that operation. And above all, think through what the possible consequences may be. I think what this report reveals is the tension that was present within the government at the time of a generation of policymakers who were shaped by the massacre of Muslims in Srebrenica in the mid-90s, the massacre in Rwanda two occasions when the world stood by and let these massacres take place, and that incentive, that tension, we must do something to protect civilians, with the other tension, which is the lessons of Iraq. And so I think what we saw here was a half and half policy. The UK government must intervene to protect civilians, to stop them being killed. That's an immediate threat. If we don't act now, Gaddafi's forces will go into this town of Benghazi and kill people. But then after that, yes, we might try and get rid of Gaddafi, but we don't want to get too involved in the post-Gaddafi process because we saw what happened in Iraq. We don't want boots on the ground. We don't want too much intervention into another country's internal conflicts. So let's not involve ourselves too much. And that left us with a half and half policy with the situation we see today.
James, thank you very much. James Landau. The government's plans to introduce new grammar schools have dominated Prime Minister's questions. Jeremy Corbyn said they segregated children. Theresa May accused Labour of stifling ambition. Let's go to our assistant political editor, Norman Smith. An unusual sound for Jeremy Corbyn, support from behind and in front.
Well, it's striking, Simon, because you'd have to say Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn, chalk and cheese, very different individuals, very different politicians, and yet on grammar schools, they are agreed about one thing, and that is they both feel absolutely passionate about this issue, albeit on opposite sides. It is a touchstone issue. It is a conviction issue for both of them. So Jeremy Corbyn today is saying grammar schools would lead to segregation of children at 11. It would lead to a second-class education system for the majority. Theresa May retorting, saying, look, you and I went to a grammar school. It's how we got to where we are today. Grammar schools today are not like the 1950s. They would provide diversity in education, more opportunity. What does it tell us? It tells us that both of them are in effect putting their political bodies on the line over grammar schools. It is going to be the standout clash between them. Just have a listen.
What we need is investment in all of our schools. A good school for every child, not this selection at the age of 11.
What we need is a good school for every child, and that's precisely what we will be delivering with the policy that we've announced. And with that policy, we will see universities expanding their support for schools. We'll see more faith schools being set up. We'll see independent schools increasing their support for schools in the state sector.
And expect Jeremy Corbyn to keep up the pressure over grammar schools, because he looks across the chamber and he sees on the Conservative benches significant disquiet with Mrs May's stance from senior figures such as the Tory chairman of the Education Select Committee, former Education Secretary Nicky Morgan, and they believe, Jeremy Corbyn believes, he can force Mrs May into a U-turn. One other reason, this is an issue on which Jeremy Corbyn believes he can unite a party which has spent most of the summer gouging each other's eyes out. This, at least, is an issue on which Labour is united.
Norman, thank you very much. Norman Smith there in Westminster. Great Britain's Paralympic team has equalled the number of golds it won at London 2012, and there are still 5 days to go in Rio. Para-GB are still second in the table at the moment, behind China. There was success on the track and in the pool in Rio on day 6, and there are many more medals to be won today. Our sports correspondent Andy Swiss is in Rio. Andy.
Yes, Simon, welcome back to Rio, where, as you say, it was another golden night for the British team. 3 more gold medals for Stephanie Millward and Matt Wiley in the pool, and for Libby Clegg in the athletics. And I can tell you that in the last few minutes, Dame Sarah Storey has won gold in cycling's time trial. Now, what that means is that Britain now has 35 gold medals here. That is 1 more than they won at the whole of London 2012. Now, obviously, their cause has been helped by the absence of the Russian team here, but even so, that is a tremendous achievement after another tremendous night, as Alex Gulrajani now reports.
For Libby Clegg, Rio has provided a defining moment. In 12 months, she has suffered injury, seen her funding withdrawn, and a reclassification, meaning she'd have to run with a blindfold on. But despite it all, she delivered. With home favourite Guilhermina disqualified for a full start, Clegg, alongside guide Chris Clark, snatched the 200-metre title to become the double sprint champion. And she wasn't the only Briton to do that on the track. After leaving the sport a decade ago, Georgina Hermitage, who has cerebral palsy, hasn't been quiet on her return, adding 400-metre gold to the 100-metre title. At 22, this is Holly Arnold's 3rd Paralympic Games and her first medal. a gold and a world record in the javelin. But nothing yet for David Weir. Rio has had its challenges for him, missing the birth of his fourth child, and now a title he has held since 2008 gone. 2 more chances for him to bow out of track racing on a high. Like Weir, Steph Millward has seen it all before. A veteran of Beijing and London, but in Rio a first. Silver and bronze finally upgraded in the S8 100-metre backstroke. Ollie Hind had to make do with silver in the men's event, but Matt Wiley went one better. Gold for him in the S9 50-metre freestyle. The medal his by 0.04 of a second. It doesn't get much closer. Ellie Simmonds, though, was not close enough. She has held the S6 400-metre freestyle title since winning it in Beijing, but bronze was the best she could do. And the medals didn't stop there. Piers Gilliver won silver in the wheelchair fencing, while for Rob Davies, a crowning moment. 11 years ago, he was a semi-professional rugby player until a serious spinal injury. Today, he's a Paralympic champion in table tennis. Alex Gulrajani, BBC News.
Yes, it was another great day for the British team, and I'm delighted to be joined by one of those gold medalists now, Holly Arnold, who won gold in the javelin. Holly, many congratulations. First of all, what does it mean to have that gold medal around your neck?
Words can't really describe having this around my neck, but all I can say is it's been a bit of a whirlwind, but I am over the moon.
And it was some day for you, wasn't it? Because you set 2 new world records. Was it just one of those days when everything clicked?
I think so, yeah. I wasn't actually expecting to go 43 metres. I've previously just had a 2-month injury leading up to Rio, so it's been one of the most difficult times really going into Paralympics. But having all the support and from everybody and knowing that I can go out there and break the world record, just didn't realise I could go 43.01, but there's still more to come, so I guess that's really exciting.
And you were so in the zone, you didn't actually realise it was your final throw, did you?
No, I had a bit of a ditzy moment. I think it was just because I went over the line just because I didn't like one of the throws, and I just cleared that out of my head, and I thought I had 2 more throws left. So when I actually hit the 43, I did celebrate, but I guess I didn't celebrate enough. But, you know, in my mind, I went out there and did what I needed to do, but yeah.
And your family are out here as well. What have they said to you?
They just couldn't believe it. I think I saw my mum absolutely burst into tears and my brother, and just having family here was just probably one of the most special times of all. But I think we were all just a little bit shell-shocked, really. But we knew I could do it. But it's just when it actually happens, it's just mind-blowing.
Well, Holly Arnold, many congratulations. So there we have it, another great day for the British team. And as I say, another gold medal in the last few minutes for Dame Sarah Storey in the cycling, Simon.
Andy Swiss, thank you very much. And you can follow all the action from the Paralympics across the BBC. There's live commentary on BBC Radio 5 Live. The BBC Sport website will have the latest throughout the Games, and you can sign up for medal alerts via the BBC Sport app. Coming up to 1:20, our top story this lunchtime. The head of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, has named the team which will negotiate with Britain over Brexit. Nigel Farage said someone who actually likes the UK should lead the talks. And coming up, a detailed new map's being made of our galaxy, showing the location of billions of stars far, far away.
Coming up in South Today, Holly will have your local weather forecast. And as the South is set for another sunny day, doctors warn there's been a big increase in cases of skin cancer. So why aren't we heeding the warnings? And do we need more motorway services?
As maps go, it's out of this world. The European Space Agency has released details of the position and brightness of more than 1 billion stars. They've been collected by the Geospace telescope over the past 3 years. The study will be used to create the most accurate map ever of our galaxy. This report by our science correspondent, Pallab Ghosh.
Our sun is one of billions of stars in our galaxy, which is the Milky Way. According to the textbooks, this is what it looks like. But that iconic picture is based on informed guesswork from the observations of just a few hundred of our closest stars. Over the past 3 years, the Gaia Space Telescope has been scanning the skies and has mapped the brightness and precise location of more than 1 billion stars. So very soon there'll be a more accurate picture of what the Milky Way really looks like. This is the data that Gaia has collected. You can actually see how the stars move, and each one is in its exact position. Very soon astronomers hope to have the first ever accurate map of the entire Milky Way. By measuring the movement of these stars, astronomers will be able to predict how the galaxy might evolve in the future. And by running the animation backwards, they'll be able to see how the Milky Way was born and how it first developed billions of years ago.
This Gaia data release is the first step towards a complete revolution in our knowledge of the structure, the origin, the evolution, and what the universe is made of. Gaia, over its lifetime, will tell us how dark matter is distributed, where stars were born, how they die, when they die, and how they age, and much more about cosmology and the nature of gravity.
The telescope has collected so much data that the European Space Agency has invited schools all across the world to help them by sifting through the information and letting them know if they discover anything interesting.
Looks like we've done it! We found a supernova! Brilliant, guys!
We discovered a supernova, which using the data we've been looking at from stars and what we thought was supernova and what we got was a light curve, so yeah.
So how does that feel, Samela? You don't discover a supernova every day.
Yeah, that's 100% true. It's different because you don't see these kind of things every day. And it feels really proud to think that I discovered a supernova at the age of 14.
Astronomers also hope to discover completely new objects in our galaxy that are currently beyond our imagination. Palab Ghosh, BBC News. New figures show unemployment continuing to fall and a record number of people in work. Between May and July, unemployment fell by 39,000 to 1.63 million. The figures are the first to take into account any movement since the Brexit vote. Average earnings increased by 2.3% in the year to July, but they were down by 0.2% on the previous month. Police have arrested 2 people on suspicion of murdering a man who died in a stabbing in East London after confronting a gang attempting to steal a moped. The victim, named by police as 27-year-old Ricky Hayden, was attacked in Chadwell Heath in the early hours of yesterday morning. His father, Paul, suffered knife wounds. A taxi driver accused of murdering a young woman promised to tell the truth as he began giving evidence in his defence, insisting he had no reason to lie. Christopher Halliwell, who's 52, is accused of murdering 20-year-old Becky Godden, who was last seen alive more than a decade ago in Swindon. He denies the charge. Sarah Ransom is at Bristol Crown Court for us. Sarah.
Yes, hello. At Bristol Crown Court today, Christopher Halliwell took to the stand in his defence. Now, he's representing himself, and this was the first time that he'd taken to the stand. Now, he's accused, as you say, of murdering Becky Godden. He's accused of strangling her and burying her in a field in a remote location in Gloucestershire. This was more than a decade ago. He's currently serving a life sentence for another murder of a young woman, Sian O'Callaghan. And it was during that investigation that he led police to the place where they found Becky Godden's remains. He then has since denied murdering Becky Godden. And today he said when he was working for a taxi driver in 2003, around about that time, he repeatedly gave rides or had clients who he believed were 2 drug dealers. And he said he gave them rides. And on one occasion, they wanted him to take them to this remote location where later he said they'd murdered, that they had buried a prostitute. He said he had nothing to do with that. He also said that he wanted to give police that information about a body being buried there because he wanted the truth to come out, and that he'd also wanted to jeopardise and ruin the career of the senior investigating officer at the time. Now, since then, he's also been talking about his marriage split. He's also been talking about the fact that he repeatedly went to the red light district and met with sex workers. He will continue giving his evidence this afternoon, and the trial continues.
Sarah Ransom, thank you very much. The latest ceasefire in the Syrian civil war appears to be holding, and the focus is turning to getting aid into the worst affected areas. The United Nations says there's been a significant reduction in fighting across the country as the partial halting of hostilities enters its second full day. However, supply convoys have yet to be allowed safe passage into besieged areas. The former Israeli President Shimon Peres remains in a serious but stable condition after suffering a massive stroke yesterday. The 93-year-old Nobel Peace Prize winner is in an induced coma and on a respirator in a Tel Aviv hospital. His son-in-law said he seemed responsive when taken out of the induced coma for a short while overnight. The disgraced former president of European football's governing body UEFA, Michel Platini, has said he has a clear conscience and didn't make a single mistake. The Frenchman, who's serving a 4-year ban from all football activity for receiving an improper payment, was speaking at a ceremony to elect his successor, Alexander Šeferin. Mr. Šeferin is currently the head of the Football Association of Slovenia. A cyber attack in which the personal medical details of high-profile athletes were illegally accessed has been condemned as cowardly and despicable. Information relating to American tennis stars Serena and Venus Williams and Olympic gymnastics gold medalist Simone Biles was accessed. The Russian Sports Ministry denies there was any Russian involvement. While sports correspondent Natalie Perks is here, this hacking couldn't have come at a worse time.
Well, it's incredibly embarrassing for the World Anti-Doping Agency, WADA, who were already under a lot of pressure since the McLaren report, of course. That alleged state-sponsored Russian doping, and it led to more than 100 athletes being banned from the game. So what have they done? Well, this group calls itself Fancy Bears. Strange name, but that's what they've called themselves, and it stands for, apparently, Fair and Clean Sport. Now, they've hacked into the ADAM system, which is the whereabouts system that athletes use to tell drugs testers where they're going to be, and then they've leaked confidential medical data online, which they say proved WADA was complicit in knowing some athletes were taking banned substances in Rio. Now, in the case of Simone Biles, who won 4 gold medals this summer, the drug she is taking is for ADHD. And the key thing here is that she and Venus and Serena and the other ones mentioned have done nothing wrong. These are drugs with TUEs, which is a therapeutic use exemption, which means a doctor has cleared her to use it and the World Anti-Doping Agency is happy with her using it. Martin Rooney is a British 400-metre runner who competed in Rio this summer, and he's told the BBC today that this sort of tit-for-tat that's going on between Russia and WADA is a real shame.
Petty. It's sad. Like, obviously the Russians knew they were doing something wrong, so if it is a Russian organisation that has hacked and released this information, it is petty, and it's a shame that, like, Serena Williams is arguably the best sports person in the world, and they're literally just trying to take her down. She's doing incredible things for not only like women in sport but sport in general, and it just feels petty.
Well, today, the Russian sports minister, Vitaly Mutko, has joined the Kremlin in denying any Russian involvement in this hacking, saying, how can you prove they are hackers from Russia? You blame Russia for everything. Now, the Fancy Bears group is releasing this medical information. It's clearly a criminal act, but they say they're going to keep going. More information is going to come out. And if you look at the medal table, who was top? US, who was second? Team GB. So there is a chance that British athletes like Martin Rooney could be caught up in this.
Natalie, thank you very much, Natalie Perks. 1 in 10 of Britain's species of wildlife is threatened with extinction. Charities and conservation groups say intensive farming has an overwhelmingly negative impact on nature and is the most significant driver of this dramatic loss of wildlife. Climate change, loss of habitat and urban sprawl are also having an effect, according to the second State of Nature report. John Maguire has the details.
This is BBC Radio 4. It's 2 minutes to 6 and time now for Steve Backshall to present Tweet of the Day.
The turtle dove may have a distinctive and well-known call, but it's one that's increasingly rare. Today's State of Nature report, compiled by more than 50 wildlife organisations, claims it's just one of the species nearing extinction in the UK. The report cites intensive farming as the main reason behind the decline. It studied 8,000 species and found that 1,200, more than 1 in 10, could soon disappear. And with 3/4 of the UK as farmland, intensive agriculture is seen as a major factor.
Well, what our research found was that it was the biggest impact, likely negative impact, because of the changes in farming techniques. Going back a few decades, farming became more efficient, more productive, which is great news for farmers and great news for getting food on our plates at a reasonable cost. But the side effect was there was less room for nature. Nature was squeezed out in this move towards more efficient farming.
Home Farm near Langport in Somerset is a 1,000-acre intensive arable farm, but here they try to work with nature and not against it.
Linnets, yellowhammers, all the thrushies. There's also
the farmer Henry Lang receives funding from the European and British governments to help him protect wildlife. He's seen a marked difference in recent years, including some rare species.
There's little things you can do, and sometimes very often it's just a little bit of thought, just leaving a little bit around the edges, perhaps not cutting at certain times or cutting at other times, just being aware. Yeah, it's not rocket science.
Sir David Attenborough has said the natural world needs our help like never before. We may well have been responsible for much of its decline, but its survival is also in our hands. John Maguire, BBC News, Somerset.
Time to look at the weather, and with the details, here is Alex Deakin.
Thanks very much, Simon. Some extremes of weather yesterday. Incredible downpours, but also incredible heat. Gets at 34 degrees Celsius, highest September temperature for over 100 years. Today, well, it's just the warmest September day for 24 hours, but still 32 degrees is pretty impressive for the time of year. And for some, actually, it'll be a bit warmer today than it was yesterday. Northwest England, an example, Wales as well. Some cracking sunshine in Morecambe, as taken earlier on today by Morecambe Bay Watch. And across eastern parts of Scotland, it's a very different story. We've got, again, that big contrast, a lot of cloud here. So as a result, it's an awful lot cooler. Two places not too far away, but you can see if on the eastern side there's a lot of cloud here on the satellite picture, but further west much more sunshine. The cloud's got a slightly different texture across northern parts of Scotland and to the west of Northern Ireland. That's a weather front providing a little bit of rain, but for the vast majority away from that mist and low cloud in the northeast, it's a cracking day. Dry, very warm, sunny and quite humid too. But that weather front still providing some rain across the Highlands of Scotland, the Western Isles of Scotland as well. A little further south in Western Scotland could get temperatures into the low 20s with some sunshine, but we're only in the teens in the eastern side of Scotland where it stays glum. The opposite is true in Northern Ireland, with eastern areas favoured for some sunshine. Now there's just the chance of seeing one or two isolated thunderstorms break out over the Midlands, North Wales, North West England. But for most of England and Wales, again, it's all about those temperatures. Perhaps not quite as high as yesterday, but still very warm for this time of year. Now, any of those isolated thunderstorms should fade from northwest England, North Wales. We'll keep some showers in northwest Scotland overnight, but for most it's dry. Again, you'll notice that ghostly white, the mist and murk just drifting back into northeastern areas, and you will again notice the temperatures tonight. Another really warm, really humid night to come. Into Thursday, and again we start with a lot of low cloud, perhaps more so across parts of the Midlands, Northern England than today. It could take quite a time to clear away. Some patchy rain drifting into the northwest. A greater risk of seeing some thunderstorms develop across the south tomorrow. But again, for most, it is another very warm day. We could again get to 30 Celsius. When's it all going to end? Well, really on Thursday night and into Friday. That's when weather fronts merge, low pressure systems develop, and we see potentially some quite big downpours. All the heat and humidity giving way to some thunderstorms. That weather front drifting across, bringing some heavy rain for a time during Friday. Western areas looking a lot drier and a lot brighter and also a lot cooler. And that's how we go into the weekend. For most of us, Saturday is a fine looking day, but a lot cooler, Simon.
Alex, thank you very much. A reminder of our top story this lunchtime. The head of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, has named the team which will negotiate with Britain over Brexit. Nigel Farage said someone who actually likes the UK should lead the talks. That's all from us now on BBC One. It's time for the news where you are. From me, good afternoon.